Welcome back to another podcast here in the Ram's Den, and today we're here with Nathan McGovern. Nathan, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing?
Great back. Yeah, it's great.
Cool, mate. Cool. So we had you on last as after you famously went live on Piers Morgan's TV show. Well, I don't know if you call it TV, YouTube Live, whatever it is that he does, and just took the piss out of him basically for his segment, which propelled you into global fame. How's everything been since all of that?
Yeah, pretty good. It was like that initial kind of spike, and I can always tell when the video is doing the rounds again because I always get just the hate on Instagram, the classic, anti-vegan comments. Yeah.
Today we're not here to talk about that, right? We're here to talk about Just Stop Oil this time round. It's something that we briefly touched on in the last podcast, but only very, very briefly, I think. We just mentioned it. And it's as far as I know, I guess you're back in the news again, actually. I just checked before our podcast that the Prime Minister just failed to criminalize your protests, right? So you're back in the news right now for, again, you never really were out, but now it's back in a big way. So for people listening, I just want to make it clear that we are going to talk a lot about Just Stop Oil and what it does and why you do what you do and all this stuff. But it's not going to be a biased, kind of all one-sided podcast today. I have some things I want to bring up. Some are my own questions, and some are questions I've seen posed by, to be totally honest with you, mostly right-leaning, like politically leaning people have been the biggest critics of your movement, right? And you can usually dismiss a lot of what they say, but there were a couple of things that I thought, actually, I don't really know the answer to that. So I've got some of thso questions for you as well today. So we're going to try and be objective here and give something for everyone. That's the aim today, and get to the bottom of all of this, right?
Yeah.
So let's kick off then. Just talk me through Just Stop Oil, and for imagine that I've never heard of it before. Imagine the viewers never heard of it before. They don't know what the hell's going on. What is this? Start there. Like, what is it? What do you do? Take us through that.
Just Stop Oil is a coalition of groups that are centered around this one key demand, and that's that the UK government stops all new licensing, consents, and exploration for fossil fuels in the UK. So obviously, use gas, coal, oil, all of that, and instead, the reserves that are left over, use them whilst fully transitioning to renewable energy. Okay. And essentially, it's a civil disobedience tactics until that demand is met, essentially.
Right. So it's really simple, actually. Very simple. Why that aim specifically?
I guess it's, part of it's very practical. It's like fossil fuels are obviously enormously driving the climate and ecological emergency. Mm-hmm. And also it's probably the thing that is most in the public consciousness of, this is something that we do need to get off eventually. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people don't realize how fast that change actually needs to happen.
Okay. And then let's assume that whoever's watching and assume that I don't know why it needs to happen. Talk why is this a goal exactly? What's going to happen if this doesn't happen?
Yeah, so I'm not a scientist, but the basic science is you burn carbon that is locked in to physical matter that turns into carbon dioxide and other gases, which essentially blanket the Earth and mean that heat rays can get in from the sun and then they get trapped in the Earth in the greenhouse effect, raising global temperatures. And then what that means in reality is that large portions of the Earth will be too hot for humans to live in, too hot for humans to grow food in. There'll be potentially billions of humans made refugees by this. And some people would say that we're looking at societal collapse if it's left unchecked.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable to say if all the science checks out and it is just it's factual, it's happening, that these things the temperatures are going to rise, then of course it's not just getting nice summers. There's a lot of problems that come with that. There are places that are already the hottest in the world getting even hotter. It's going to wipe a lot of people out. And as you've said, I think it's just common sense that even a couple of degrees either way causes a lot of problems. And I don't think I've seen some people try to argue against that, but it seems to be a really weird thing to try and argue. It's not, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that there's a very delicate balance, right, on our Earth and our ecosystems, and any tiny fucking change it can screw everything up. So okay, definitely a good reason to try and a good thing to try and change, right? And you mentioned civil disobedience. So, by the way, we're going to come. There's kind of two things I want to get into today: the civil disobedience stuff, and also the yeah, so another I don't know how to define this, but yeah, there's two things I'll get into. So let's start with the obvious thing that I think most people know of you guys for, which is that civil disobedience. You glue yourselves to stuff. You guys smash stuff. You smash the petrol stations. That was you guys, right? It's petrol pumps. You block a lot of roads. I've seen your guys getting booted a couple times, dragged out of roads, and then bravely actually they climb back into the road again, which is pretty wild. I've been quite impressed that sometimes middle-aged and older people who get dragged off and then they just kind of slowly crawl back to exactly where they were, and that's actually it's impressive, to be fair. But obviously from the outside perspective, somebody doesn't really know any of this stuff, is they're looking and they're thinking, geez, these people are mental. So talk me through civil disobedience. Why you guys, let's start with the non-destructive stuff, like blocking roads and gluing yourselves to stuff. Like, what's the aim of that?
So I think maybe it's like important to like view it in context of like this. For groups like Just Stop Oil or Animal Rebellion, it's never the first resort, right? You try dialogue, petitions, writing to MPs, going to Parliament, standing on the pavement with placards, and very quickly it's kind of the realization that that doesn't work. And I'd personally say if it worked, it would be illegal. The state, the government has a vested interest in the status quo, right? I mean, that doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. So then when it comes to civil disobedience, it's kind of two strands, is like, causing like material disruption to the thing that you want to end. So like back in April of 2022, that was the kind of first wave of Just Stop Oil disruption, was like going to the heart of it, blocking oil terminals in the UK with our bodies. And then there's also the kind of media and publicity side of it. So like, other stuff like, you can imagine you can get more publicity from blocking a road in central London than you can from blocking, this road in the armpit of nowhere leading to an oil distribution centre. So it's kind of two strands of like material disruption, then press and media coverage as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's basic. I mean, if you look at it, I guess it's kind of just marketing, isn't it? When you look at how companies promote their products, sometimes they do what, like, can they call it guerrilla marketing, where they do these really aggressive, sometimes stuff to try and trigger people or get people to talk about something by surprising them or shocking them. I guess it's kind of a flavor of that, basically, isn't it? What you're doing, except they don't break the law, whereas part of what you do is breaking the law, because then it generates more of that attention to the cause and disrupts. And then the destructive stuff that you're doing. So the gluing down and the blocking of roads to get the attention, to cause the issues, and right. So that's one thing. Why did some people decide to take that a step further and actually go and start like smashing things? So I know the logic behind the first. What's the logic behind taking it to that? I feel like that's the next level. I feel. I mean, I've done civil disobedience, and that's not a line I would personally cross. So I'm curious to know. Maybe you can convince me to cross it. So tell me why you guys decided to go for that.
So I guess like from a strategic perspective, if you do the same thing over and over again, the impact it will have is lessens over time, because it's not a new thing anymore. So there's that aspect of it.
Okay. So it's like the escalation, basically. Like I said, it's an escalation. That's the point of it. It is an escalation, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also it's kind of looking at again, I mentioned like material disruption. If you want to talk about it in like purely financial terms, like causing damage to property is causing much more material damage to the industry that you would like to see an end to, than gluing yourself to a road and stopping their product being distributed.
Okay.
So kind of looking at it that way, and just like embracing that, sometimes you do need like these flashpoint events, because that reinvigorates interest, it reinvigorates the conversation, I guess like on a deeper level, it's kind of there is an ongoing debate in kind of civil disobedience, civil resistance circles, and without about are these tactics non-violent? Do they cross some sort of line when it comes to that? And yes, I guess the view on that would be like, when it's a petrol station, for example, that's private property of, a company like BP or Shell, where they've just announced 32 and 62 billion pounds of profit in the last financial year, respectively.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going into a working class person's home and setting fire to it, which is their personal property. So there's quite fine distinctions there that kind of help me to see that as like perfectly acceptable
I
part of
understand.
civil disobedience.
Do you worry about the public perception on this? Because I understand your point. I don't really care about. I don't feel bad for the company at all when it comes to this kind of stuff. They're insured to the teeth. It's not going to cost them that much money. Even though they try to put it out into the media. Oh, it cost X amount of damage, and it's like, mate, that's like 0.0000 multiple zeros and 1% of your profits. You're going to be fine. Yeah, no one's putting you out of business here. So I don't care about them. But on another level, on a social level, there is a level of intimidation that comes with somebody who's prepared to smash stuff, right? And that's ultimately what I would say. Apart from the hardcore conservatives, they care about private property and stuff like that. But I think most people aren't in that boat. Most people, I would say, are just concerned, like, oh, these people are aggressive. These people are willing to smash stuff, and it puts them off. Right. So, I mean, does that come across to you guys? Are you concerned about the public perception, or is this just not even on? It's not a priority for you at all?
So I'd say kind of on that respect, I think like a lot of effort goes into those kind of actions of like telling a story that makes it very clear why specific targets have been chosen, and that the means that have been chosen to take that action are the least threatening. So, for example, when Extinction Rebellion have done similar things, like they painted all of the tools that they use pink, writ like words like love and respect and things like that on it, and just purposely made sure no one was like in the vicinity of the actions that they were doing, that sort of thing, to try and like show a story of, yes, we are doing this thing, but we want to make it clear that we don't mean any harm to life by doing it. But that's a tricky story of like, because you've always got the tabloid media who are going to portray it how they want to portray it, and then a lot of more people are going to read the Sun and are going to read your press release. But yeah, the bigger question about public perception, I guess, is like it's always like what you're doing is turning people away from your cause, right? That's the overarching worry. And I think it's important to look at the data on it. Look at the quantitative research rather than the qualitative opinions. And for Just Stop Oil in particular, a YouGov poll that was carried out in the second half of 2022 actually showed that there was no significant decrease in support for increased climate policies in the UK, that went alongside increased public disapproval of groups like Just Stop Oil.
Okay.
So what it does is, the group themselves might be unpopular, but the conversations that they generate go so much further than that, and demonstrably public opinion is not negatively affected by it.
So this thing that you're talking about was on the public's perception, or was it on the perception of the part of the public that cares about climate problems?
I guess it's the perception of the public towards the groups carrying out these actions, and then perception of the public towards the issues that they're dealing with, as well.
Because it would be predictable that people who care about the issues would be supportive of a lot of the things you do, but the ones who don't care about the issues, which is probably quite a lot of people, to be fair, it's probably the majority. The same way as animal rights, is the majority of people don't care about, they care, but they don't care enough to do anything about animal rights. And the same thing, they care about the planet, but they don't care enough to do anything. Like, that's the majority, right? So is this looking at that's what I'm trying to ask. Was this like general public, or was it?
Oh yeah. So that survey, that research was the general public.
Right. Okay, cool.
And like in the UK, it's about 81% of people, when they get asked like, what are your top three concerns, the climate does figure in that top three. But it's what people are prepared to do. But yeah, I think it does speak to a bigger issue of like, there's a lot of people who might say, I support your message but disagree with your cause. And then I think what I think about in that instance is how Martin Luther King approached similar issues. And he said that the biggest enemy of progress for the civil rights movement was the white moderate, was the person who said, I agree with your cause, but you could find a better way to go about it.
Yeah.
And obviously we can't transpose exactly but it's a similar kind of emotion I feel.
I get you. Yeah, I get you. We often hear this in the animal rights world that like, oh, but this many people, like 90% of people are against factory farming, and unfortunately, what I think there's a big problem with these studies and surveys is that we can't read people's minds yet. Although I'm sure there's many people out there working on that right now and actual mind reading shit. Hopefully, it never comes to light. But yeah, right now we can't read their minds. So people say what they think makes them look good, and oftentimes what they want you to say, like what do they think you want them to say. So when a study comes in front of you and they say, do you care about climate change, hardly anyone's going to tick no, because even the most hardcore kind of anti-just stop oil people will tick yes, because they think that they care, right? They have to say it, they have to say yes, otherwise you're a bad person, aren't you? You're selfish. Same thing about animals. So yeah, that's why I was kind of asking a bit more about that survey, because they're not completely useless, but yeah, they don't really tell us what people really think, do they? And like you said, how prepared they are to actually do something about it, which is not a lot of people, is it?
Yeah, people are very, very complex, especially like on the animal rights, animal freedom issue, the amount of people that say they're an animal lover. And then, and then the perception issue is like, this is just a massive tangent, but doing research recently on the British public's perception of British farming, and it's like 80% of Brits would say that the average animal welfare standard on a British farm is high, or high with some bad exceptions.
Yeah.
Where we, that's demonstrably untrue.
That's globally. Every country on the planet, you pick anyone off the street and ask them, do you think your country has the best? And they say yes. Everyone thinks they've got the best. And I've been to enough countries to know that for a fact, that everybody thinks they've got the the best. But so yeah, you're right. You're totally right. Perceptions are all over the place. But you guys are not. But back to the point that you guys, you don't want to turn people off your cause. But you don't actually, you're not trying to get people to do something, are you? See, that's the difference between what you would do and why I would say, for example, right, if I took a brick and I painted it pink and I threw it through a butcher's window, no one cares that it's a pink brick and has love hearts on it. They're all upset. Even if the butcher was a massive international butcher chain, they would be very angry and they would say, I'm an aggressive, violent vegan. And the difference here is that I'm trying to get people to go vegan. That's something I try to do. Whereas in your case, I guess you don't really have that same risk, because it's not like you're trying to get someone to do something. You're trying to get the government to do something, right?
Yeah, I'd say, the idea of like, in Just Stop Oil's case in particular, of needing like to get loads and loads of people doing something isn't so much there. Like, like they would outwardly say that they don't mind being unpopular, as long as the message gets through. Which I guess is like where there's very big asymmetry between like the animal rights movement and kind of the anti-fossil fuel movement. It's like, that's like, honestly, if it's the same price, no one cares about where the energy comes from.
Right.
People are intimately connected to where their food comes from.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right. So I promised that I was going to give you some tough stuff, right? And we're at that point now. So we're back on fossil fuels. You brought it up so that we can kind of bring this back around. So I was reading some stuff, and or maybe I watched it. I can't remember. And I don't have anything to put in front of you, but you can tell me if this is wrong. This is the point, right? But basically, whoever I was watching, I think it was one of these Talk TV guys actually who was mentioning this. So it's going to be good stuff. They said that if England as a country, or the UK, let's call it the UK, if it just vanished tomorrow, gone, no one lives there, it doesn't exist, there's no industry, there's nothing, then the percentage of climate emissions, right, of the problems, the problem causing gases and everything else would be, it's a tiny fraction of global emissions, right? So if it ceased to exist tomorrow, globally, actually nothing much would change. This was the argument it was making. So when we consider that what you guys do and what you're trying to get the government to do, what's the point? I guess what I'm trying to say here. And I understand that I'm not saying like, oh, we can't change everything, so just fuck it. That's not what I'm saying. But is there not another way to have more of a global impact as opposed to focusing on a basically an island, a tiny island? Yeah, talk me through this.
Yeah, it's a really good point. There's like so many things that I could bring in. I guess I could argue about the science. I could argue. I could talk about Britain's historical emissions are staggeringly high. I could talk about Britain exporting emissions to China and India. But I think like philosophically at the heart of it is this idea of like act local and think global. I'm a British citizen. The vast majority of people that take action with Just Stop Oil are British citizens, and we can take action here and have faith that all across the world there are similar groups of people taking action wherever they are. I'm thinking, for me, yes, this is a small change that I personally can affect, but I have enough belief in humanity that there are enough people doing the same thing in enough places to affect this, collective change.
Yeah.
That's like the deeper kind of philosophical argument, I guess.
Yeah, it feels like so. I had a similar argument, and I'll bring this in because I think it's not argument point with another friend of mine, Lawrence. That I think you know. I think you at least maybe some videos with him. He's an antinatalist, which for those who don't know what that means, he's against procreation, is against having children, and it's for quite practical reasons. His main reason is he doesn't want to cause more suffering, and having kids causes suffering because the kids will 100% suffer. Basically, that's his point. And I kind of push back in the same way I'm pushing back here as well, except with him, it was my own point. With this one, it's more of a point I've heard from somebody else. But yeah, the point was that the most suffering in the world with procreation is happening in the poorest places in the world because of a lack of education, lack of contraceptives, and obviously the disease and starvation and dying of thirst. And so I kind of asked, why would you focus on a developed country where most people are born into wealth and try to get those people to stop and spend all your time and effort getting those people to stop procreating, as opposed to spending all of your time and effort working with those communities or working with people, teaching them how to teach people, and you wouldn't do it yourself because you can't speak the language, you don't know the culture, but you could help the people over there, the leaders, to lead and do it with their own, and I kind of push this, and it's the same kind of thing here, really. It's, I get your point. You're operating on your doorstep. But let's touch on the other points to this. The philosophical point I get, but then the global reach from this, which I'm thinking practically, I want to kind of get into practically. How is the work you do in the UK going to impact the globe? How is that? Because if it doesn't, then we're talking like 1% to 2%, and the world will keep on going the way it's going. Nothing will change, right? If you succeed 100% in the UK, nothing much will change. If it's limits at the UK. So talk about the global impact of what you're doing then, or the hopes of that, please, if you can.
Yeah, so Just Stop Oil is actually part of something called the A22 network. Stands for April 2022, along with I can't remember how many other very similar groups across Europe and America. So there's already this kind of global communication and collaboration going on between similar groups that, when you put them all together, do affect a really substantial portion of fossil fuel emissions. So just kind of on a practical level, this like act local, think global is being realized. And then I think, if we kind of bring it back to like Britain as a nation, it's widely accepted that the Industrial Revolution was began in Britain. Britain as a country has always been at the cutting edge of technological and mechanical advances. And seeing that, if this change can happen in what is considered one of the world's most developed countries, there's almost a trickle-down effect. I don't want to speak like that because, it makes it sound like I'm talking about first world and third world, which is,
But that's just reality, though. Like when the developed countries get some technology, eventually it gets down to developing countries like mobile phones, right? When for example, if the UK gets the iPhone 20, these days, the developing countries can also access that, but more importantly, they can access the iPhone 12 now at a significantly lower price. So that it does work that way. That's capitalism, basically. It's how it goes, right?
It's kind of on like a purely pragmatic level, like high quality renewable technology is going to be developed faster and more efficiently in a country like the UK versus somewhere, let's say like Kenya, for example. That's objective fact. And I think I think it might be a bit of a pill to swallow. It's kind of if we were to go to like these developing countries and talk about them stopping their reliance on oil, gas, coal, whatever. that would cause the deaths of millions of people because there just isn't the infrastructure there to transition right now.
Yeah.
So that would almost be, I know there's like an analogy of like, it's like, are you putting like a plaster on a gaping open wound, or are you going and stopping the bleeding at its source? If we stop the problems up here, then they're not going to occur down here. If we stop the problems down here, everything above it is still going to have the problem.
Sure. No, I understand. Yeah, the technology element of it is something that makes sense to me for sure. It's like I said, when developed countries develop technology, then it eventually, as they get more and more modern, more versions of it, the older versions get cheaper, and then people who don't have as much money, or countries that don't have as much money, can buy it, and then it's how things have gone. So that makes sense. So on another topic, like, or another point that I've seen kind of bouncing around. So in the UK, there's been some environmental decisions made, and they're not what you're asking for. But it feels like possibly some people are taking advantage of the kind of, I would call it, potentially hysteria that you guys are causing, because and that's your goal. Your goal is to cause panic because you want them to, come on, make this panic. You need to panic, right? But I feel like, and well, some people feel like that this is there are opportunists out there. For example, there's been some new laws in the UK, or some new rules where they're limiting how far people can drive, where they can drive, if they can even drive at all. And this hit the news recently, and then it got debunked. But then reading further into it, it wasn't debunked. It was happening, and it's happening in my area where I'm from as well, like near Manchester. They've not put it in place yet, but there are signs up warning you that you're going to have to pay if you go through this area soon, and things like that. And again, back to the original point I had, this has a negligible impact on the environment, right? It's literally not going to make any difference at all, right? When you put it in numbers. Do you worry that you guys are potentially helping these people to kind of get away with this stuff? Because I see this as a power play. This is a way to try to, control the people, which I know you guys are like, you're like, what's the word? Not anarchistic, but you are, you're kind of like fuck the police kind of crowd, right? You're like, you don't want to be controlled. You don't want to be.
Yeah, it's like,
right.
Recognize that the system itself is broken.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. So great. So we're on the same boat there. Are you worried that some of these players are using this environmental movement to do stuff like that to control people?
Yes, but it's kind of at the same time, in a capitalist economy, if someone wants to make money, they're going to find a way to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a million and one excuses, and I'd go further than that and say, when we look at traditional kind of softer approaches to environmentalism, that might focus on individual changes, it's failing to tackle the root cause of the problem. Mm-hmm. So, these things like congestion charges, ultra low emission zones, it's putting a burden of guilt onto just the average citizen, right?
Yeah.
And you do need to tackle that power structure head on. And there's obviously going to be fallout from that. It's the way that the 1% stays in power is by pitting the rest of the 99% against each other.
Right.
That's always going to happen, right? No matter if it's Just Stop Oil, Animal Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter. The 1% is always going to be trying to put us against each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's good to hear you talking about this, because I honestly think a lot of climate activists and environmentalists would not have said what you just said. They would have said, yeah, it's a good idea. We want to get cars off the road. And this is what's driving some people up the wall, mate. This is what's pissing some people off, because they can see clearly that there are some power plays being made here to control people more and more. And it's clear that it doesn't take, like I said, it doesn't take a scientist to figure out that stopping someone from driving in a specific place or charging them for it is not going to help the planet, right? And also there's climate credits. There's these new systems being discussed. You know about this, right? Where, it's like it was a conspiracy theory until probably a couple of months ago, basically, when it started to actually get discussed. Where, you're going to have a certain number of credits, and if you fly or if you do something, then that'll take a lot of your credits, and you won't be able to do other things until you gain that back.
Yeah.
How they'll limit you is most likely going to be digital, using controlling your debit card and digitally. This sounds insane, but it's already happening in countries like China. They have it already in place, and it's being discussed for the West as well. A lot of people link you guys in with that. They think that's what you want. Are you telling me that's not you're
So,
not on that?
it's accepting that like we do have to change the way we live,
Mhm.
but in terms of financial burden, it's not the responsibility of the majority of the working classes and the middle class to be doing that, right? So, like, I've got a friend, he lives in Greenwich in South London, and every Sunday he goes with his family to church in Farringdon. They go in the car because there's 6 or 7 of them, and the public transport cost would be stupidly high.
Yeah.
And when the ultra low emission zone, congestion charges kind of come into play, as they are going to come in later this year, like that's going to screw that family going to church on a Sunday. Now, what should be happening instead is, we look at the British government giving hundreds of millions of pounds a week to fossil fuel companies in subsidies, tax cuts, and so on. That money should be used to create reliable, renewable public transport systems that mean that my friend in South London has a cheap way of getting to church on a Sunday. Like, I think that's the way I would look at it. Is like the money game is completely in the wrong direction, and the wrong people are getting shafted because of it.
Yeah. And you said about them turning people against each other. I think, this is, well, you see the public's reaction to, obviously, the surveys say one thing, but the vocal public says another thing. And we have that, obviously, the same case with the animal rights world. So I know how this goes. The loudest people are usually the most, obnoxious and more moronic. But yeah, I mean, you see people are fighting you guys, even though it seems from what you're saying that you guys are actually trying to get the government to do this instead of what they're planning to do to people. But what the people understand is that you and the government are stopping them from driving. You and the government are going to bring in this social credit carbon emission system that makes it so they can't go on holiday. They see it as it's you guys, like so your Piers Morgans of the world, at least. They might know that it's not you guys, but they assume that it is. Or they might they're unsure, but they're like, they must be all in the same boat. Like the World Economic Forum, the UN agendas, and all this stuff. They see you as you're pushing that agenda, and you're totally behind
Yeah.
it. But in reality,
No.
you're against you're against these agendas. You're trying to get them to do something that's not putting it on the individual.
Yeah.
Have I explained that correctly?
Yeah, I would say so. It's this massive thing. It's like it would be very childish of me to sit here and not accept that the public have been disrupted and been impacted as part of this. I think that would be a complete dereliction of my personal responsibility. I know that I have disrupted the public in the past, but I guess on that in particular, it's kind of looking at it as a cost benefit analysis on the whole of the change that is hoping to be affected. But with that being said, people do get angry. Their days do get disrupted. People's lives do get changed by the actions that Just Stop Oil take. There's no way of getting away from that.
Yeah. I mean, it could mean the thing, I think, honestly, a good sell from you guys, if you were to try to, get around that, would be to talk about what the government wants to do to you. That the government wants you to fight for climate change by limiting how much you can drive and telling you've got to apply for carbon credits. We're protesting the government to try and make them pull their fingers out of their ass and do things that mean you don't have to do that shit. Like, actually, you should, when we block you, you should be happy because we're actually trying to tell them, no, don't put it on the people, sort it out. So if anything, you're fighting on their behalf, if anything,
Yeah.
which
And I think that brings in like the one big kind of aspect of this that we haven't talked about yet. So like whilst like Just Stop Oil and Animal Rebellion in their own communications will make that very clear as a message, 80% of the UK's media is owned by 3 billionaires.
right.
And that is a huge elephant in the room that we can't avoid in this discussion. The
Yeah.
vast majority of media that people consume is controlled by people who have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are.
And it's even someone like myself. I don't know. I mean, obviously, Just Stop Oil is not linked in with animal related stuff, but I knew that Animal Rebellion wasn't. Well, at least I assumed they weren't trying to get behind all this carbon stuff. But I assumed Just Stop Oil was. And I'm speaking as somebody who pays attention to some of this stuff. So you can imagine somebody who's really just literally not in this world at all, and yeah, they're absolutely going to think that your organization is part of this big agenda to limit them, stop them from doing the things they want to do, and charge them for things, and for using carbon, which is still, I still can't get my head around, like, how, what a crazy idea that is, in in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's just madness, isn't it? To put the onus on the individual,
Yeah.
while they're, like you said, while they're piling hundreds of millions of pounds into fossil fuel companies and
Yeah.
all the
Yeah,
lobbying
when
and
Britain's
everything.
taking a private jet to go to a climate change conference where they're serving steak on the menu and telling us all to eat bugs and stop driving cars, it's exactly that.
Yeah, no, it's wild. It is absolutely wild. And the problem is with our conversation now is very reasonable, and but these are the conversations that won't get out, like the bigger conversations that get out, unfortunately. I don't know how you guys stand with people like Greta, but the bigger conversations that get out is that whole thing with the protest, and she was getting arrested and posing for photos. That breaks the news, and then this fake arrest is the thing everyone's talking about, and there's this whole agenda. It's all fake. It's all, they want us to do this, they want us to eat the bugs, they want us to do that. And this is the stuff that makes the news, the drama. But this kind of reasonable, no, 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 we've got a pretty clear focus, and we want to stop the government from doing all this shit to you. It's not going to make the news. It's not going to get,
Exactly.
you can say it as much
Yeah.
as you want. It's not going to break through, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I think it just kind of speaks to, why do these massively disruptive things happen? It's like, if I was to go and stand outside Parliament and try to say this to every single MP, I'd be ignored. No news television
Mm.
networks would pick it up. No one would give a flying monkeys. The only time that they give a damn and start discussing the issues is when you've done something to put it on the news,
Mm-hmm.
which is sad in a lot of respects, but it's just the way the world works.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, and it's the way. Yeah, it is the really bad state of things that we've got to now, where it's the TikTok generation basically. It's everything's got to be fast and stupid and huge. Otherwise, and even then, even when you break the news, it only lasts a day or two, and then it
Hmm.
starts to trickle down to the late, people that missed it, and smaller publications, and then eventually it just, it's a week maximum, and it's completely out,
Yeah.
right? And you have to go try and do it again, get it in the news again. So actually, yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised that but these are your opinions. Obviously, I guess they're not the opinions of everybody, of the organization on the whole, right? I would assume, or
Yeah, it's kind of, I haven't been actively involved with Just Stop Oil in quite a while.
yeah,
I was very involved back at the start of 2022, and I've got friendly relationships and good working relationships with people in that Animal Rebellion and Just Stop Oil collaborate a lot. But yeah, these are my opinions that I hope I'm putting forward in a way that, yeah, viewers might be able to get bored with.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I would just hope that, yeah, I think it possibly could be a thing that, if there were people in Just Stop Oil that are supportive of the things that we just mentioned, it's like a kind of internal outreach would probably need to be done, because there are a lot of power moves being made off the back of the environmental movement by people who are trying to put more control on the public, for obvious reasons, because that's ultimately, why does anybody get into a position of power? That's the only reason to do it. So there's no other reason to control people other than the control itself. It's what these
Yeah,
people go for, right? That's why they do what they do. So yeah, it is really worrying, because then what it tends to do, it confuses people, because then you've got people like you who have got a cause, and you want to make the world a better place, and then you get blurred in with those people who want to restrict people's freedoms and control them and turn it into some kind of dystopia.
yeah,
Some kind of, those movies in the future. I'm just watching the series The Last of Us. I don't know if you've seen that. It's like a dystopian future where the government controls everything, and hands out credits and stuff. Like, there it feels like some people, they think that you want that, is what I'm trying to say, as environmentalists, and it's not true, right? They're putting you in
yeah.
that same boat.
I think it's a trap that we can fall in a lot of times. Like, even like the technology discussion earlier, it's like
Mm,
this technology could be made, it could be fantastic, but if Bill Gates or George Soros or any one of those billionaires gets the patent on it, what good is it? Because they're going
mm,
to extort everyone else for that property, right? And yeah, kind of, yeah, there's a bigger issue I didn't mention about, like, I'm fully in support of like climate reparations. I think that the global south is due so much money and so much resource from countries that are developed, because those countries are the ones experiencing the worst effects of climate breakdown right now, even though they've contributed the least. So I think, yeah, as well as like this development of technology, we need like this social revolution. And I'm not afraid to say we do need a revolution in the way that we govern and the way that we live, so that the decisions aren't being made for Rishi Sunak and his mates. They're being made for the people who are on the front lines of all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's people that don't have vested interests in making money out of the public, right? I mean, that's somebody who's better to be in a position of influence, as opposed to someone who literally just wants to stay in that position so they can get as much power and control and money as possible. Yeah, I don't think that's controversial to say. And the climate reparations thing, help me understand that, because from what I understand is not per person, but per country, it's actually developing countries that are the biggest in terms of emissions, because of their size, because of the populations. Is that not
So
mixed
if
up?
we maybe talk about Brazil, India, and China, for example, like, you'd definitely be correct in saying that as a country they produce a lot of emissions, but you do have to do some like kind of thinking around it. It's like, why are those countries producing that many emissions? And a lot of the time, it is because of the demand for products that are produced cheaply there in the so-called developed world.
Okay.
That drives a lot of it. And obviously, these are countries that do have very high populations.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of net emissions, it could be very high. But if you do like per capita, they might be lower.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think if we specifically look at a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, as the prime example of countries in the Horn of Africa, like, these are countries being ravaged by drought, by famine, by heat wave, as a direct result of increased carbon emissions and the globe heating.
Yeah.
And yeah, these are the places that are being ignored for the most part by the so-called developed world.
Right. Okay. So when you say reparations, I think maybe I'm understanding that incorrectly. So basically, you just want the developed world to make more efforts to help people in these parts of the world to survive these conditions that the rest of the world has put them in, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think that there has been a lot of accounting done on this. I'm not like an expert on it, but there have been figures chucked out there that countries have agreed to, in terms of, this is the amount of money we're going to send you, or this is the infrastructure that we are going to provide for you, and a lot of that hasn't materialized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. Really, it would be a massively charitable thing, of course. But I think sometimes we fall into this weird like way of thinking where we think that there's it's like the money's limited, or there's not enough money. But when you take a look at it, how countries operate and what the things they do spend money on, I mean, there's a lot of misspent billions going around, right? And a lot of dodgy happenings, a lot of dodgy things going on. We don't need to get into this, but there's been a lot of I don't know if you call it conspiracy theories or whatever. A lot of people theorizing, for example, that all of the money going in, or a lot of the money going into Ukraine, has actually been part of some way of trying to shift money, and not necessarily going to actually helping. Like things like that. A country sending billions and it disappears, and no tracking. No one knows where it's gone. It's not been spent on anything. It's just So when we're in a world where billions can just go from one place to another and no one can track it, then I'm sure we can spare a couple billion to some countries who need help, right? To get past these problems you're talking about.
And also, that there's actually a very capitalist argument I can make for that as well. So even if someone completely disagrees with everything on what I've said, the climate crisis is going to wipe a huge chunk out of global GDP. So it's actually in a capitalist's best interest to be averting it, because they're going to lose a lot more money in the future than they would invest now into things that would mitigate the worst effects of climate breakdown. And I feel like that's like a completely different thing, but it's something that people like me, speaking generally, are pretty scared to make that argument because it's like, oh, you're accepting capitalism, but sometimes you do have to meet people where they're at.
Of course. I mean, you gotta. It's the way the world is. Like, for example, as people like you and I and lots of vegans, we tend to lean towards the left or like progressive. I put myself at this point probably like only a slight left lean. Definitely more, seeing both sides a lot more these days, but no extreme either way. And you start to acknowledge, you start to realize that most people actually fall on the right with most of the things they do. Like people are mostly conservative, right? With practically everything they do in day to day life. Did you get all that, by the way? It cut. I lost your video.
Yeah, it's cut my camera off.
Okay, but you can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. As long as you can hear me, it should be okay. So yeah, most people most people are conservative with the way they eat, with the way they live, with the way they everything, tradition, culture. That's what they want. There's not very many people who are willing to break those things. So this is the majority, whether you like it or not. Just like capitalism is what we live in. So it's a good thing to tailor what you've got to say to the majority. If you want the majority to listen, right, you're going to have to. Otherwise, you're just going to preach to your tiny minority every time you open your mouth, and that's not helping anyone, is it?
Yeah, exactly. It's this ability to understand that. Yeah, if you're gonna, like you say, preach to the choir, you've already got the people who are going to be doing things for you anyway. You need to be able to speak to the general population, which, yeah, as you say, is right leaning. I know this like the legacy of Reagan and Thatcher and neoliberalism and New Labour, of course, in the UK especially, that's brought us to this situation of capitalist realism. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely is. But yeah, you're right. And the capitalism point, I think that's, just in a practical sense, if you open a business and you want to pour money into it and someone says, hey, there might be a tidal wave, or there will be a tidal wave in like 10 years if we don't fix this other problem. And you're like, well, let me just keep pouring money in and just hope that doesn't come. I mean, it's not, you're probably not a very good capitalist. It's not a very good risk assessment. Like if you are a hardcore capitalist, then this is a real thing to consider. And actually, even I would go even as far as saying there's money to be made from the solutions, and this is where this ties back into what you're talking about. You want the government to fund the technology, and again, this is capitalists who are going to be making the technology, right? So companies, I highly doubt, unless you know something I don't know, I highly doubt there's any company out there that's going to make this super high-tech renewable energy technology for free, right? They're going to want to make profit from it, which is, I don't know, it's a necessary evil, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's, you can work within the system and work out with the system as well. Whilst all of that's happening, you can actively be working to dismantle the power structures that do exist. I think if you just focus on one or just focus on the other, you've got a pretty critical blind spot in your social justice activism, really.
Yeah, for sure. There's one actually on that same topic about the renewable energy and the companies making the kind of green energy technology. I saw this again. I've read a lot of stuff on both sides of all of this, and some of it was very out there in the, this seems like a bit of a wacko theory, and this is one of those kind of wacko theories. But I'm going to put it to you in case you've heard it before, and you let me know if you've never heard it before. There were some people claiming that the companies that make the green technology, they're actually owned by or in the same boat as the oil and gas companies, and it's a lot of the climate agenda, the people kind of like the UN goals and stuff like that. It's all, I can't remember exactly how it was. Basically, the general theory was that they want to declare a state of emergency worldwide, because then the government will pour money into those companies to make the alternative energies. And those companies are funding a lot of activist movements because they want that to happen. I don't know if they're linked in with oil and gas or not. That was a separate thing. But yeah, is this something you've heard before, that you guys are funded by companies that want to make money out of what
Yeah.
you're promoting?
Yeah, it's actually quite funny, like the whole like controlled opposition kind of psyop kind of thing.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of it came out. It was last year that Just Stop Oil's primary funder is the Climate Emergency Fund, which in part was set up by someone called Eileen Getty, who's like her ancestors, her family was heavily involved in the fossil fuel industry. Now, a lot of people have like just done that, skipped to big oil funds you to make climate activists and climate policies look bad, so oil companies get more money. But yeah, it's a lot more in depth than that. It's like a lot of these people, we don't control the status of our birth. We don't control how much money we have when we get born, but we can control what we then decide to do with it, right? And Eileen Getty, for a very long time, has been very outspoken on climate and has no direct connection to ongoing fossil fuel activity. That is long gone. But yeah, that's maybe a mistake on Just Stop Oil's part that they just didn't. They weren't the ones to break this news, right? They
Right.
reacted to it coming out. So it seemed like they were maybe playing a little bit of catch up. And they didn't just own it from the very beginning,
Got it.
perhaps, is where the issue arises from.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in general, the whole controlled opposition thing is a lot of mental gymnastics to make people feel better about themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, I imagine a lot of the things I've mentioned are, there's the thing with these things. I mean, when, oftentimes when lots and lots of people are trying to make themselves feel better, sometimes they come across something that's actually like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Let's pause for a second. Because yeah, the reason you found this wasn't very good, right? You were just trying to be you're trying to look for an excuse to not care, but you sometimes they can come across something that actually has some merit. And this one wasn't one of those things, by the way. This wasn't even in my notes to bring up. It just came up as like random. The other things I mentioned were things that I thought, maybe there's some merit to these. And some of them you agreed with me. Yeah, there is merit. We don't want that. That's not what we're doing. And then some of them you answered and actually put to bed. So it's been really good to bring these things up, and it's going to be helpful. I think this is going to be a good podcast. Well, I would hope anyway. I mean, the people who should watch this maybe won't, but I'll try and fashion it in a way where it should attract people who maybe have issues with the climate movement and with Just Stop Oil as well. Because I've given you the arguments that they give. So I would hope they would come and watch the answers, where it's not like a peers style thing where I'm just shouting at you and talking over you and calling you names or whatever. It's actually, we've actually been able to deal with the problems, which has been good. So what's next then for okay? So you said you've not been with Just Stop Oil for a while, but last I heard you had some. Didn't you have some legal stuff with them?
So it's kind of the legal system takes a very long time to take its course. So yeah, at the moment I have 2 convictions for actions that I've taken with Just Stop Oil. They resulted in what's called a conditional discharge, which is like a slap on the wrist. If you do anything naughty again, we might come back and sentence you for this one. I have for Just Stop Oil specifically the big trial I have coming up, which obviously I have to be careful the way I talk about, is for one of the actions you mentioned earlier, where we caused damage to a petrol station. So that will be seen in front of a jury in a Crown Court, where we will argue that what we did not amount to illegal activity through various legal kind of avenues, and then at the end of that 4 or 5 days, the jury will vote, obviously behind closed doors, and then say whether we are guilty or not.
Okay. That's going to be quite a public thing. That'll probably get you back in the news and everything, I assume. Possibly get you back on Piers Morgan if you're lucky.
I hope not. That's kind of thing. And then other thing, obviously, back in December when we rescued the beagles from MBR Acres, that's an ongoing case as well. That might see Crown Court. We hope it does. We want to put animal testing on trial, but that's not Just Stop Oil.
Great. Well, I mean, it's. I mean, man, there's nobody can say you guys aren't brave. I mean, I guess some people would call you stupid. There is a fine line, but I would go with brave because you're fighting for things that actually matter. You're not just doing this randomly. You're not just doing these things willy nilly and putting yourself in these situations for nothing. So of course, you're definitely brave, and I hope with the Just Stop Oil and with the environmental protesting you guys are doing, I hope that you get what you actually are going for. I hope that the government does start to put money into the important places that you want them to. And I really, really hope that it doesn't go the dystopian way. Before we close off, let me ask you one more question. If the government, UK government, did start to go down that road of really kind of going down this dystopian route of we're going to control you based on your climate footprint, stuff like that, is that something Just Stop Oil would publicly come out and maybe even protest against, and put the onus back on the government? Do you think that's something that is on the table, or how would that go?
I would say it would be on the table, and I very much hope that would be the avenue that would be chosen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't see any merit in settling for these, quite frankly, bullshit individualist policies that are only put in place so people can get rich and the government can control the population for their own gain.
That's awesome, man. You're gonna make a lot of people happy with that statement, and I think because it really does set you apart from what people think climate protesters are, and unfortunately, well, at least you and Just Stop Oil, but there unfortunately are a lot of climate orgs and climate activists who love that stuff. They think it's great. They're still the people that believe recycling does something big for the environment, which I'm sure a lot of us know by this point that it's very small. I mean, it's better than just, it's probably better than not doing it, but ultimately it's not going to change much, right? But there are a lot of people out there who truly believe that all these, you just give the government all the power and have them, this is going to help the world, and it's so wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just read a history book, for fuck's sake.
Exactly.
Come on. Jesus Christ, come on. So no, it's been great having this chat with you, man. Is there anything that I've missed you wanted to include?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe on like the misconceptions or things that haven't been put forward well. I think it's like, I know I've come across here maybe like trying to defend myself and defend Just Stop Oil, but like I think we have to admit that like any movement is going to be imperfect. Any movement's going to do things that it looks back on and thinks maybe we shouldn't have done that. But I don't think we can let perfect be the enemy of good enough in situations like this. So there's like a humility there, I guess, of saying, there are problems, they need to be worked on. And yeah, also kind of, again, this is something that the media does a really good job of portraying people like myself as people who expect to walk away scot-free from breaking the law. And I speak for myself and a lot of others when I say that that's 100% not the case. Any actions that I've taken that have resulted in arrest, I, at the time, accepted the potential consequences, still accept them now, and I'm just willing to face whatever comes with that. There's no naivety there at all.
Brilliant. Well, that's a great closing statement, man. And again, I appreciate you putting to bed a lot of the things that I wanted to get into today, and a lot of these concerns that people bring up, and you did a great job. And I'll tell people watching that they can go to follow you on Instagram, right? They can keep up to date with you post some stuff there, and it's tell me again, what's the app?
That's a good question. Let me have a look. You might need to cut this bit.
It's like, no, we don't need to. I like them being a bit like raw like this.
Promo.
Just keep people waiting for the. I'm looking as well.
_ Nathan _ McGovern.
Great. Okay, perfect. So get over and follow on Instagram. Keep up to date with everything he's up to, and I guess you'll be posting about. Oh, you'll be back in the news, no doubt. So I'm sure you'll be posting some of that stuff over there. Yeah. And thank you everybody for watching. Get down in the comments and let us know what you think about everything we discussed. Do you agree with Nathan about the going for the government, getting them to change, or do you actually think that it's better to get individual people to change? Which, I mean, if you think that, I'm not sure why. If you think you can convince either of us that that's better in terms of environmental impact, then we'll get in the comments and have a go of it. Thanks again, Nathan. And I'm sure you'll be on again soon, right?
Yeah. It's been wonderful to have this chat. Yeah, great.